What's going on, everyone? So Scream 7 is supposed to take place and center around Sidney Prescott, Gail Weathers, and primarily Sidney's family, right? Mark Kincaid is rumored to have been signed on. They're supposed to be Sidney's children, and I'm all excited for the family life. Now, I am somebody that has said I prefer to move off of Sidney Prescott. I actually was okay in Scream 6, her not being involved. I thought the movie was fine without her. I mean, I have my gripes and my issues with Scream 6, but I thought Sidney not being in it was not a factor, right? I thought it was okay. It was fine. But I understand the circumstances in which you brought her back, right? Given all the context behind the scenes and with Melissa Brera and everything like that, right? It's like it makes sense to kind of just keep it simple, go the safe route, at least for this film, bring Sidney back, Neve Campbell, pay her what she needs to be paid, and then kind of tell a new Sidney Prescott story. Now, I like the family dynamic, and I really hope that they kind of use that as a building point for this film, because it's something that we've never really seen with Sidney Prescott. It's something that we've never really even seen in a Scream film. I mean, there's always been family connections and like bloodlines and stuff, but actual like family being targeted by Ghostface is kind of new territory for Scream. And I'm excited for any time that there is kind of a new kind of vision for what a Scream and Ghostface target could be. But one of the things that I've expressed is my concerns with just the motive and reasoning behind Ghostface targeting Sidney. My big concern is it's kind of just the same old rhetoric over and over and over again, right? It's just some long lost cousins, brothers, nephews, uncle wants Sidney dead, or some family member or somebody just wants Sidney dead, and it's just like can we go a different direction? Because to me, you don't necessarily need rhyme or reason for Ghostface to want Sidney dead. It's Sidney Prescott. Like, that's the white whale for Ghostface. Right? Every Ghostface would love the opportunity to take out Sidney and be the first one to do so. Well, there's rumors, again, it's rumors until it's confirmed, so take it with a grain of salt. But again, kind of a rumor that I hope is the case, which is that there's not really necessarily a motive for why they're going after Sidney outside of just the hate for Sidney Prescott, that they just hate Sidney Prescott. And that kind of seems to be the trend based on the rumors that are coming out, right? That Sidney's very hated in her town and in her area. It's something that I talked about in a previous video. Go check out that video if you haven't yet, after this one, of course. But like, hey, she's hated by her kind of town, and I think that could be something that could play kind of good on screen, right? Like, how does Sidney deal with the impact of like, a bunch of town people or city people or whatever she's at, all kind of just wanting her not around? Like, she's, the angel of death, like in Scream 4. Or, how do her children respond? Are they bullied at school because they're Sidney's kids, right? How does Mark Kincaid deal with it, right? Like, there's a lot of different angles and stuff in which you can approach a Scream film with that kind of idea of like the hate. Well, then if you add in that like Ghostface wants Sidney dead because they just hate Sidney, right? Like, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like I've talked about, like, you don't need a reason for Ghostface to necessarily go after Sidney Prescott, right? Now, obviously, we want a motive or something to an extent as to why Ghostface is doing what they're doing, but why they're targeting Sidney and trying to kill Sidney, that is something that, is incidental, right? I mean, like, you go back to the first one, like, you hear that she wants a motive, motives are incidental. Like, to me, that's kind of what it is, right? I'm all for Sidney being in this upcoming film. Sure. Again, I get it. I'm all for it. Understand the circumstances. But to me, you got to be creative here, right? Like, I don't need to see a sixth same old Sidney film, right? Like, I don't need to see what we've seen a dozen times of like the same story and outcome and result of a Scream movie, right? You have uncharted waters here as far as Sidney Prescott, her having a family, the complications that has and that arises with Ghostface being, looking at her to target her, right? Now she has people that she's accounting for other than herself that she has to try to keep safe and alive beyond herself, right? For the most part, it's always basically been her. Like, yeah, she has love for Dewey and Gale and other characters that have came along throughout her life, but ultimately she's not responsible for them. She's trying to keep herself alive. Well, as a mother, it's your job to keep your children alive. As a wife, it's your job to try to keep your husband alive. Right? So there's people beyond her that she is accountable for, that she's going to do whatever she can to try to keep them safe and them alive. That's great. I'm excited for that. Hopefully they actually kind of dive into that and use that. But from the other side, again, the motive, the reasoning, the rhyme, like, I don't need her nephew coming out of the, it's like, oh, Billy's brother, like, it's like, come on, like, I don't need that stuff. And I do have concerns in that regard, because Scream 5 was a very copy paste of Scream 96, and Scream 6 was in a lot of ways a copy paste of Scream 2, and it's just like the motives and all that stuff. Yeah, they switched certain things up and there was differences and elements and stuff, but for the most part, it was a very reminiscent, right? We've already seen, several of the same kind of adaptations of Ghostface targeting Sidney, and I just think that this is a real opportunity to kind of break that mold and do something different and do something creative. And I like the idea of, like, nah, it's just Ghostface just hates her, right? Like, Ghostface wants to kill her, right? Like, we don't need a reason for Ghostface to want to kill Sidney. It's it's self-explanatory, right? It's simple, right? Like, there is a prize of, like, you're completing your motive, right? Let's call that the major, right? Like, you got your major prize of, like, man, I want to take this person out over here, and I want to, I have my reasons and my motive, and I want to accomplish my plan. But then there's the grand prize, which is like, I could do that and kill Sidney Prescott? You're telling me I can do both? Like, I have an opportunity here. Sydney's in my way. Like, let's go. But, like, even in Scream 5, like, that was something slightly, because I still felt like they kind of were lackluster in the utilization of Sidney. But, like, Sidney wasn't, like, she was just kind of there, right? Like, Richie and Amber were kind of just excited and stoked that they were going to have the opportunity to kill Sidney, or at the time they thought, right? Like, they weren't targeting her. Like, there wasn't a real reason for them wanting to kill her outside of, like, they're trying to, bring back the Stab movies, and Sidney just happens to be here, and now we get to take her out too, right? Like, to me, like, that's kind of a similar mold that I'd like to see with the upcoming Scream 7, where it's just like, Ghostface is taking them out. Sidney just happens to be where they're at, or in the vicinity, whatever. And it's like, hey, we hate Sidney Prescott. Let's get rid of her, right? Like, you don't need a motive outside of that, right? Like, just, they're a Ghostface. They want to be Ghostface. They're excited to be Ghostface. And Sidney's the white whale. Perfect. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. Pass a question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? Do you like the idea of just Ghostface targeting Sidney and going after Sidney Prescott solely just on, hey, it's Sidney Prescott and I hate her? Or do you think that there needs to be more kind of incentive, more motive, more reason, more logic behind it? Again, I just kind of like the idea of, like, it doesn't really need, it's self-explanatory. It doesn't need a ton of explanation and insight, right? Like, you have a Ghostface. Ghostface has a Sidney. Ghostface wants Sidney dead, right? Like, it kind of just the circle of life in the Scream world. But I understand some people, kind of feel different ways. Some people want other things. I get that some people, they want a genuine motive and some relation and some connection. But I kind of like the idea of, like, Sidney doesn't really know who they are, right? Because, like, I get it's always somebody, but I kind of like that doesn't necessarily mean Sidney has to know them, right? Like, they can know of Sidney, and to me that's almost more terrifying, because it's like, the killer could be next to her and she wouldn't even know, right? Where if it's like somebody she could, like you get the reveal. To me, it's like it also just depends on the structure of the film. Like how's the film structured? If it is something that is like heavily Sidney focused and the motive and everything kind of centers around Sidney, then okay. But I just think if it's just like, hey, the topic of the day is hate and everyone just hates Sidney, then I don't think you really need anything outside of that. Like, who cares if she even, I mean, I'm sure, I don't want it to be like necessarily a complete stranger, but I don't think it's somebody like it has to be a relative or somebody of relations, right? It could just be somebody that she knows in passing, like the neighbor down the street that she never talks to, but she's like, hey, I know you, like type thing. But again, it just depends on how it plays out. Anyway, again, love to hear thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. Helps me enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one.